And so you guys are probably wondering why I'm wearing a crown. But we're not machines, we're people, right? So I can go from my work day to my Bridgerton mode. And let's talk about royalty, okay? You guys like my crown. Say yes, say no. I gotta be a little dramatic just because we are producing all day long. We're using our brains, we're producing for other people. Why can't we unwind and have fun? And this actual show series has been one of my favorites. So I thought it was appropriate for me to pay homage to the conversation tonight. So tonight we're talking about Black royals and Bridgerton, mostly Bridgerton, and the perspective of Blacks in cinema spaces. And so we'll start off with the conversation around Black royalty, and then we'll pivot a little bit about what we see on the screen. So for those of you who haven't watched the show, Bridgerton is a series on Netflix that really highlights it. There's a lot of stuff in the plot line that is meant to bring reconciliation, to highlight Black folk in main roles. It is also a wonderful creation of Shonda Rhimes, who we love so much. She's a Black writer, producer, and filmmaker who published or produced Grey's Anatomy. What else, Christina?
Scandal. She wrote Dorothy Dandridge.
What is the one that everybody I can't remember.
How to Get Away with Murder.
How to Get Away with Murder. There was another one. She's just wonderful. She's a wonderful
she's amazing. She actually started on the Martin Show.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. So we're gonna get a lot of
PA. Yep.
A lot of nuggets tonight. As you can see, my friend Christina has a lot of great information. So before we talk about the actual content of the subject matter, I'm going to shift over to Christina to introduce herself. Introduce yourself, Christina, and you can share with the people any projects that you're working on really briefly, and then we'll talk about our subject for tonight.
Hey, how you guys doing? I'm Christina Faith. I'm a writer, producer, director, educator out of Philadelphia. I am from New Jersey. I went to Rutgers, New Brunswick. For my undergrad, so RU. Yes, I'm an alumni. Rutgers changed my life. I absolutely love Rutgers. I am currently, yesterday we released my first feature film called Love You Right. It's an R&B musical. It's available on every platform that is out. And this Saturday we have our virtual watch party. And so if you want to join us, you can go to Love You, just Google Love You Right, and we're somewhere, and I'll put it in the chat as well. So I'm really excited to speak to you guys. Because I'm Blackly Black, and I love cinema too.
Hey, great. So let's relax a little bit. I hope you guys have a snack beside you. This is going to be less heavier than last week's topic. So we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to get into tonight, which is starting with Bridgerton and then shifting over to Black royals. So Bridgerton is about a young lady named Daphne Bridgerton, and she's the oldest daughter of a Bridgerton family, powerful family. She makes her debut into, Rutgers email. She makes her debut into Regency in a competitive marriage market. So we see in Bridgerton, as the summation of the plot comes together, we see Daphne kind of rising to the ranking, and they go through this whole process of preparing young women to be presented to suitors in order to be purchased or picked up, so to speak, by high royalty. And so we see her rise in the ranking. And then we also see many parts of her unravel in this particular series. If you haven't watched it, please go to Netflix. It is a wonderful, wonderful series. As a matter of fact, drop in the chat section, everybody in the room, if you watched it or not. And so as we shift, we watch the love story between Daphne and Simon. Simon is a Black royal who is a very fair-skinned man, and we're gonna discuss what all of this means in terms of film. But you haven't seen it. Okay, you guys, well, you'll want to watch it after this.
I'm sorry, we're gonna ruin some stuff for you guys if you haven't seen it.
Okay.
But it's still worth watching regardless.
So he's a fair-skinned man. He is a royal. We see him as a duke. They're not interested in each other. I'm not going to share all of that. But he is Black, and his mom died giving birth to him. In giving birth to him, there was so many lineage issues around colorism, around patriarchy, around entitlement and male privilege, that you'll see in the series. But the biggest thing is you see two different worlds attempting to come together in terms of race, not necessarily from the class perspective, although there's a high level of class in there in terms of pedigree and how pedigree should match with pedigree. And in that conversation, there is something said about where particularly Black people in the royal lineage come from. And so this conversation behind the backdrop is being introduced by Shonda Rhimes in a narrative format, but really the pervasive dialogue behind all of that is, who were the Black royals in Europe? Were there Black royals in Europe? Was there a first Black royal in Europe? So the suggestion is that Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg was actually the first Black royal. Some would say that it was Meghan Markle. And so when Meghan Markle came onto the scene, and that was during our lifetime, everybody was celebrating, oh, Black and and UK Regency. However, there was not a nod back to Charlotte of Mecklenburg because it was suggested that Charlotte of Mecklenburg may not have been Black. However, many historians contest that she actually was. And she came from a Portuguese line of Black royals, and then transitioned into her regency and married King George. Yes, the King George that we know. And so this plot is built semi around Charlotte and her regency and queenship. But within the movie, series, what's interesting is that Lady Danbury, who raised Simon, a very Black woman, and maybe only the only one brown melanated woman in the series, steps in as a mother figure to Simon and talks a little bit around episode 3 or 4, how Blacks came to the Regency and how so many Blacks came to the Regency, that the marriage between Charlotte and King George actually created a reconciliation merger. And the relationship between the two created access for more Black dukes and more Black duchesses and more Black queens and Black royals. And so the conversation, I bet y'all didn't even know that, did you? So the conversation around Black royalty in Europe is one that we don't talk about often. But what is interesting is that American paradigms are parallel around European concepts. And so we talk a lot about Black royalty in Africa and the continent of Africa, but we don't necessarily have conversations around Black royalty in European spaces. So tonight we're just going to be pivoting back and forth between those concepts. And please, I welcome you all to jump in with questions. You can type it in the chat section. You can raise your hand. And as you're listening, if something is triggered for you, please unmute your mic. I can see you. And we'll go from there. So Christina, what are your thoughts on what was being shared and discussed?
So go ahead, what did you say?
I said, what are your first thoughts?
About Bridgerton? I thought it was an amazing love story. Let me first say that. I was enamored with it. I did not watch it for weeks because I turned it on and I was just appalled at all the white people initially, right? And so I just didn't want to, like, I've watched The Crown. I'm a fan of those kind of shows, but at the time I just didn't want to immerse myself in white culture at the time. And so I ignored it. And then one of my friends who is not a TV watcher, who just doesn't watch TV shows and movies like that, she watched it because of the young man that was in there. I think he was on the stories, and he's just a looker that she follows. And so she watched it and she was like, oh my gosh, it was amazing. I binged it. And I was like, if you binged it, I need to watch it. So I got through the first episode and I kept watching. And my initial thoughts were, as I was watching, where are the dark-skinned people, right? As a filmmaker, we get to choose who's in what role. Now, sometimes, the role calls for certain things, or the best person for the role just happens to be fair skinned, right? But there were just hardly any dark skinned complected people in the entire show. And so, though I really enjoyed it, I really had an issue with the issue of colorism, that may not have been intentional, but it felt like enough effort wasn't put forth in that, as well as the issue of the Black man in love with the white woman. And I just have issues around that in general. Not that I'm against biracial couples. I'm leery of how we are presented in the media concerning that. Very rarely do you see a Black couple that is deeply in love, that has a higher, this is called a high concept show, that has high concept shows and it's two Black people together, right?
Can you say more about high concept so that we all know what that means?
Yeah, so high concept shows are shows that are very expensive to make, right? So you'll take, we could take Succession. If you haven't watched Succession on HBO, that's a high concept show. Billions, Game of Thrones, How to Get Away with Murder, Scandal. Those are high concept shows. And none of the high concept shows that we have seen so far have we seen Black people deeply in love, right? With shows that have at least, these shows are, 30, 20, 25, $30 million an episode, right?
Is that revenue or to actually make it?
No, to make it. This is just to make it, right? So lower profile shows, procedural shows, generally come in at around 5 to 12, maybe $15,000 per episode. For high concept shows, you're getting $20 million to make an episode. We don't generally see that kind of money. And we don't generally see that kind of money concerning anything concerning Black love, Black people together. And if you do see that, you'll have a white mother and that person, somebody will be biracial down the line or something like that. It's never fully conceptualized that Blackness can be full of love, can be worthy to be seen on the screen.
It's interesting that you say that, because even in watching the show play out, again, spoiler alert, there's there's two Black characters amongst several white characters, but the two Black characters that we see in terms of one particular generation are both very fair skinned. And the one that's the Duke, the guy, he's seen at this higher level. And then another young lady who's Black and very, what they say is beautiful. She looks biracial, but she is extremely fair skinned. And as the story turns, it doesn't turn in her favor. And so you see that, like, there's this, what they call a tension or a conflict that is still a stereotypical conflict amongst the Black culture. And so media continues to perpetuate, right, this idea of, that people that are of a certain hue or certain racial space belong in a certain category. So that's kind of sort of something like, and I wonder why they played it that way, if it was for the revenue's sake. I mean, what are your thoughts around that?
So it could be audience sake, right? It allows them to get a wider audience. Black people are more accepting. We can watch white shows. Like we don't care. White people are not the same in that regards, because of, just history of propaganda concerning people of color. And so I think a part of it was, how do we get more people, right? Another part of it is choice. You're making a choice. When a lot of, and I don't say this against Shonda or anyone else, it's a part of the system. You have to play in the system. She's given the ability to make whatever she wants, right? However, the studio does have say in what you choose and how you choose it. Now, whether or not they do that from the perspective of, and I don't think Netflix is not necessarily like this. Netflix is very progressive when it comes to Black lives. I think a part of the problem with it is that they try to right some wrongs, as you said in the beginning. However, if we're righting wrongs, let's right it completely, is what I was thinking concerning it. Like, if we're going to make this make-believe world, make some people dark skinned. The problem that I had was that the father was one of the darkest skinned people. He was the darkest skinned person in the entire show, and he was made to be ugly, and rejecting of his Black son, because his Black son couldn't speak properly. So when it came to specifically Blackness, as you said earlier with the young girl, a lot of what we saw concerning that was all things surrounding negative stereotypes that continue to perpetuate our culture anyway. We see, I'm sorry to spoil this, guys, for you. We see the young girl who's pregnant, right? And she comes to stay with her family. And when she walks in the room, everyone is in awe of her. The sisters that she's staying with, that are her cousins, are like, oh, we're not going to get married this season. Come to find out, she's pregnant. She's pregnant by a white man who is not seen. She tries to marry another white man in order to change her social understanding, so people don't see that she's an unwed mother. But all of these things are done to Black people, right? We do see, concerning the lead character, we do see her, because of her virginity being taken away, right? Potentially being sabotaged and being tampered with. We do see that is an issue, but that's always been an issue for white women, right? Is the concept of purity in that regards. But when it came to just how Blackness was handled, I think that it could have done a better job of handling it. But the show is so good that you're watching it and you're like, I care, but I don't really care.
Yeah.
It's written so well.
You don't see the layers in it, which is why conversations like this are so important, because in watching it from a vantage point of a person outside of the community, or the Black community, you may hold one position or opinion, but then hearing conversations and talking in color, right? And talking around Black culture and how this concept is viewed, or cinematography is viewed in Black culture, the conversation looks a little bit different in how roles are played out, right? And so I want to just pivot back a little bit to us talking about Queen Charlotte. So Queen Charlotte is the queen. She's reigning over this place, and she's married to King George. Now, historically, Queen Charlotte, if you actually look her up, she's a person. Now, it is contested about whether she is actually Black, but majority of historians confirm she's a Black woman. In fact, it's often questioned as to if it's racialized that she was even contested to be Black, because they did not want Black folk a part of European Regency. And so, but the concept bleeding into Bridgerton and her coming in is this idea of creating reconciliation, right? And this merger between the white world and the Black world, even though the concept of Black and white binary is one that we keep hinging on in terms of media, and we're still not getting it right. The idea of creating reconciliation in the form of seeing this visually, two different worlds coming together, two different racial worlds coming together, and not particularly caring about their racial identity, but love being their guide. However, the backdrop in all of it still remains problematic. And so why do you think in all the power and control that Shonda Rhimes had to reframe the concept of the Black and white ideas in media, why do you think she still chose to? And you can't answer for her; you can only surmise.
I was gonna say, I can't answer. I can speculate. So there are multiple ways that you can speculate this, right? Number one, the studio wants what the studio wants, right? I think one of the things that the key concepts that we often ignore is Shonda Rhimes does not own Bridgerton. Shonda Rhimes does not own Scandal. Shonda Rhimes does not own How to Get Away with Murder. Shonda Rhimes does not own ER, right? Grey's Anatomy. You are work for hire, right? You create it, but then you sell the idea, and then they hire you to work on it. She has a lot of bandwidth. Her and her partner have a huge breadth of bandwidth. However, I think it's just the story they wanted to tell. Right? They wanted to right the wrong, but at the same time, would it have been logical in our visual eyes? And I'm sure they talked about this in the writers' room. I know this came up,
Right.
right? Would they have? Would it really feel like it was real, right? If they decided on more darker complected people,
Mhm.
right, to play certain roles. And our reality is no, it would not. They
Yeah.
were pushing it, putting black people in there in the beginning, right? So that concept immediately was like, oh, it's not all white, right? So as I kept watching and I saw the black people be introduced, I felt like, oh, okay. Then I saw Auntie and I was like, yes, yes. And so I think a part of it is you can right some wrongs. However, you're being asked to do things, and the people that they casted might have been the best for those roles, right?
Mm.
That's a thing too. It's almost like, well, he's the best. She's
Mhm.
the best.
Yeah.
They might not have written fair skinned people in the script, but when they walk through the door, it's like, oh my gosh, like I have no problems with any of that acting. Like the black people in the show did their thing. You cannot take that away from them, right?
Right.
I think the issue is they could have sprinkled it around a little bit more as far as complexion. But it's going to be the ongoing issue of colorism, and it's something even as a filmmaker that I have to wrestle with myself. Because I'll tell you, my current film that just came out, the bad girl is dark skinned and the light skinned girl gets the guy, right? As soon as we were talking about roles, they were with me when I came up with the idea, right?
Mm.
And they were like, well, you'll be the lead and I'll be this. And I was like, hold on, you're dark skinned, you're light skinned. Can we switch? And they were immediately like,
Right.
no, we want the roles we want, right? And so you have that toss up where we know some stereotypes exist, but who's the better in the role and what characters do they want to play sometimes? And so,
And anything to do with internalized psyche, because again, and then we've been having conversations around anti-black racism,
mhm,
and anti-black racism is this concept where we internalize that our skin is bad, right?
mhm,
And internalizing that idea, we tend to look at ourselves in particular roles and embody them based on what we've watched growing up. Like I heard
mhm,
someone say that, rest in peace, Cicely Tyson was the first brown skinned woman who taught her how to love herself, because she never saw
mm,
brown skinned women, authentic brown skinned women in media.
mhm.
Right? And so if little girls are watching images, of
Yeah.
black women in a certain way, they
Mhm.
begin to internalize, well, if I don't see myself in this space, that I don't belong there.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know you were talking around the roles that your folk were choosing. Had any of this to do with how they internalized what these characters were and
No,
how?
it wasn't. It had nothing to do with how they internalized it, right? It had to do with what we think about colorism, right?
Okay.
Um, I, I think colorism often, because we've been weaponized against each other,
Mhm.
we often weaponize each other as well, and we'll say, well, you're fair skinned, so you haven't dealt with what I've dealt with. And
Right.
I often say, what do you mean? Have you ever been the only light skinned person in a black school? Like it goes back and forth. Have you ever been the only white person black person in an all white school, right? They don't care if I'm light skinned or dark skinned. And so I think just in general, we've played the game too. And so it could have been for Shonda that she's like, I'm just not going to play the game,
Mm.
right?
Okay.
These are the best people for the role, right? And though it may give you a certain gaze, that's not why we did it, right?
Right.
That's a part of it too. And so I sometimes we try to avoid things based on perception that people will have, not necessarily because of how we internalize it. It's based on perception.
Right.
And I think even like if I'm looking at these guys, what are they called? Headshots.
Mhm. Long day.
Besides, huh?
It's been a long day.
Oh my gosh, it's been a long week. Besides the lead character who is in the bottom left, the two girls are completely lighter than that,
Mhm.
right? They're about, that's good shadowing. they that shadow don't exist on them, right? But even still, they almost blend in on the show. They almost blend in with the white people. But the issue with that, because we're talking about royalty, right? They used to cake their faces with lighter complected powder, right? And so that could have been an issue too, right? Is it logical to make them dark skinned? And then what does that look like? What does light powder look like on dark skinned people? That's a thing, right? Because I don't know if we could receive that, right? Because it's gonna be like, oh my gosh, what happened, right? And so it's so many questions, and I'm sure she's never gonna really want to talk about this in public.
Yeah, I mean that in and of itself, just to see that image, the images side by side, historical concepts around anti-Black racism, and how we even Black folk are still demonized in terms of their color and positionality
Mm-hmm.
historically from then to now, and how it's so hidden, in the idea of wanting to replicate authentic history, but still not reframing it in the most accurate ways. And I think that there could have been ways to address that. And these conversations are being had in so many circles. I mean, even the concepts of the extras in the film, right? If you're talking about a merger and reconciliation of two different worlds coming into a society together.
Yeah.
Charlotte and King George, right? Charlotte being the Black person, King George being the white person, and their love leading them. Where was the diversity of the kingdom being shown in the background in terms of even the extras that were used? Because if you look, as you guys will look around and you're watching it, you don't even see really dark skinned extras. I mean, you'll see spots of people of color. And let's just say that as we were learning the movie and seeing different characters come from across the seas, we don't see in rulers or regency. We don't see African rulers or regency come in. We don't see any of that. And so this idea of regency, just being white, still upholds this idea that royalty is only a European concept. And that's why you guys in the beginning you saw me playing the song Black Gold, because the concept of royalty is not discussed in the frames of Black folk really belonging in any hierarchy, but that when we do, there's spots of us in it, and it's not true. It's just not a history that we choose to tell very accurately. I don't know if anyone has questions. I want to pause at this moment just to reset. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts around? I just want to read too. Some of you all have been typing in the chat section. Candace says, I was apprehensive to watch because of the hypersexualization of one Black character. That's also.
Child, let me tell you. You know what? I don't know if anybody's ever seen this movie called Like Water for Chocolate. It's an old Spanish. It's from the early 90s. It's a Spanish love story, but it was turned from, I believe it's turned from a book into a movie. And it is like water for chocolate when it comes down to them sex scenes. I am a person who fast forwards it because I'm just over, I've been over it for years, the over sexualization of humanity. And so I think if you watch it, you're gonna have to, it a lot is a lot. And so even in that, like, I struggled while watching it, seeing this Black man entangled with this white woman whom is teaching him how to love. And it brought for me that same concept again. How come a Black man can only be taught how to love by a white woman? Or how come a Black woman can only be taught how to love by a white man? And so that really stuck with me while I was watching it. And so though I'm rooting for them as a couple, I'm just like, here we go once again with the same narrative. Yeah.
I think even the hypersexualization piece of when we see the women kind of fawning over him. He's not the only Black regent in the space. There, I mean, not he's not the only regent in the space. There are other men of royalty, but we don't see the women wanting over them. And so this idea of hypersexualization of his Black skin, right?
And even with the white, with the Black girl when she first comes in, right?
The fetishizing, right? Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions?
Can I just echo Christina real quick?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you touched on something really good, because on one hand, the rooting for, the love conquers all kind of couple, I'm all about it. My dad is white, my mom is Black, they're both Jamaican, right? And it's one of those things where I'm all for couples just, love each other, right? But I think it's that idea that you touched on of like, why does it take, why is it that this Black man, who I think that if you look at kind of like modern day Black dating, a lot of things talk about, quote unquote quality Black men, right? Or like men who are higher income earners or of higher status, right? So as I saw the clips for this, I saw this quote unquote higher caliber, so to speak, according to society standards, Black man. And it's like, so the only woman that can quote teach him how to love is the white woman. Again, in reality, if those are who love each other, I'm all for it, right? But it does kind of have this kind of does it take the white woman to save us again kind of thing, or like, and that is probably where I've resisted watching the show, because I was like, one, I don't want to see the over sexualization of yet another Black person on film, right?
Yeah.
Two, I'm all for, I'm a product of, love each other. My parents took a lot of flack when they were together because of the color differences, right? So I'm not opposed to that by any means, but it's just, it does echo that for me in a way that's like, is that what it takes? You know what I mean? And why isn't there a Black woman of quote unquote equal caliber to, to be of equal love story? Like, I don't know, those dynamics do kind of throw me off in film and even in media in general. So yeah, I appreciate that you kind of brought that perspective.
Yeah, that's such a broadened perspective. And I think even in your saying that, Candace, I wonder, because I have not had this conversation with my friends who are of a browner hue, what their thoughts were and their feelings about not seeing themselves in such a pervasive and what you call it high caliber film or series. How do you feel when you see something so popularized in connection with the attempts to merge Black and white worlds, not seeing such a chocolate or brown face, in terms of representing you? I mean, I don't know. And I don't know if there's anyone in the space that would even speak to that, but I don't know. That's conversations that need to be had.
Yeah, I think I had a really good thought when Candace was speaking. I think one of the things I struggle with is not by interracial couples. It's not interracial couples. It's the imbalance of seeing people of the same ethnicity together, whether it be Indian or Korean, right? When it comes specifically to Black people, not other people of color, specifically to Black people, we haven't seen a strong blue collar worker on TV since Rock, right? Who wasn't sexualized, who was just a good husband, right? And a good brother. And so it's almost like what was I watching recently? I was watching something last night. I was watching Malcolm and Marie, right? That's a whole nother conversation. That's a whole nother conversation. But I'm watching Malcolm and Marie, and I thought, and as I'm working on the new project that I have, I said to myself, and I've been thinking about this, trying to find different images in the media that I can remember. We often don't see functioning addicts that are Black, right? We often only see the image of the crackhead or strung out person who has left their families, right? We don't see the person who is home every night yet struggles with addiction, unless they're wild, crazy, cussing everybody out, violent. And so it's that image that we allow the media to continue to perpetuate. And when I say the media, those who control financing, right? To perpetuate, but then we believe that same narrative too. If I say my mother was a functional addict, we almost don't have a vision of what that is, right? And both of my parents were addicts. My mother was functional, my father was not. And so in that, I have two very distinct ways that I look at it, like, oh, yeah, she did this, but we never went without if it was available, right? She didn't, she didn't go spend her whole check, like you see in the media, and now we ain't got no food, right? And so I think we have to be very careful about what we consume, and are we thinking about what we're consuming concerning the dialogue surrounding Black people.
Yeah, that concept of even digesting and ingesting what we see in media, that again, it socializes us. What we don't realize is that everything that we take in around us, the world that we're in, socializes us to position us to accept or reject who we are, right? And so if and although news media and television and those things visually are a distant form of socialization, it's still a socialization process, right? And so again, what we see on television depicts and reflects what we are supposed to accept as our norm. And if we don't realize it, it's actually very intentional. The suggestion is, as you watch this, become this, which is why our society reflects what it looks like now. That's a conversation for another day. However, we said all of that to say that we must be careful as to what it is that we take in and adopt as as our own, or what we're impressed with, or even what we see, so that we can critically reflect on and reject it. So before I pivot to close, I just want to say thank you to Christina, and even to Candace for asking the questions, and for those of you who again did not rob us of your time, but showed us respect and honor in coming into the space tonight. Again, next week's episode of Talking Back, Talking Black will be on hood and pedigree, the merger between race and class. And so that concept of hood and pedigree, race and class, really speaks to the anti-Black concept around elitism in various spheres, whether it's academic sphere, whether it's corporate sphere, whatever sphere. And so next week we'll have two very—
That's gonna be a good one.
Yeah, hood and pedigree, right? That sounds like a movie. You could take that. So again,
all I'm saying is Black people just need to buy the hood up and stop leaving. But go ahead and discuss that next week.
So again, thank you so much for coming to another episode of Talking Back, Talking Black. I'll see you next same time, same station, Wednesday at 6 p.m. Good night, all.
Have a good night, guys.